the tyranny's marching on, the free speech issues are marching on, and then all the while technocracy is advancing and in many instances accelerating. What's even more concerning is essentially an effort to shift governance away from rule by our fellow human beings into governance by algorithm, by scientists, by experts, to create like a massive panopticon surveillance society. Ultimately, like if we're looking at tyranny and technocracy and what's the best tool, I think community. If we want to create freedom, we have to take responsibility for creating that freedom into our own hands. We can't rely on politicians. We got to find other freedom people, work together and create these alternative institutions, identify your definite purpose and just to pursue it with mass desire.
Welcome everybody to the Sovereign Mindset. Today I have an excellent guest on the show. His name is John Bush. John, thank you so much for being here. Can you start us off with a little bit of an introduction and background to who you are?
Sure. Yeah, thanks for having me, Michael. My name's John. I live here in Central Texas on a 10-acre homestead, little mini intentional community with my lovely wife and kiddos. We got chickens, we got a garden, ducks, bees, all that good stuff. Nice little food forest. And been doing activism for over 20 years now. And in that time, I've managed to gain quite a bit of perspective on what works strategically. Started off doing the whole conspiracy thing and then protesting the war in Iraq and the war on terror, and did a lot of politics, both presidential elections and local and state politics. And I just came to realize that if we want to create freedom, we have to take responsibility for creating that freedom into our own hands. We can't rely on politicians or expect people to do the right thing. We got to find other freedom people, work together, and create these alternative institutions or parallel economies and even parallel societies. So that's really what I've been focused on for the better part of the past 15 years, trying to just cut out any reactionary politics and go straight to creating and building. And it's been much more satisfactory. And in spite of all the craziness going on in the world, all the tyranny and technocracy, I've never been more free and never been happier and more satisfied with life.
Yeah, it's one of the things that I am chasing as well, aligning my values with my community and the surrounding area. Now, can I ask you, what's the problem with the system that we're currently in? Like, I know you from one of the sayings called exit and build, right? Mm-hmm. But what are we exiting? Why are we exiting that system? What's wrong with it? And what are you looking to build?
Okay, so yeah, this whole exit and build thing, it's a strategy that encourages people, if you want to bring about change, greater freedom, prosperity, privacy, we should exit these centralized, coercive, corrupt systems and institutions, and we should build new ones that are decentralized, voluntary, in many instances transparent and open source. And so I often like to point out the difference between traditional tyranny, which is bad enough, income tax, onerous regulations, the police state, foreign wars of aggression, just abhorrent atrocities overseas in the name of freedom and democracy or whatever. I don't even think they do those platitudes nowadays. So that's been around for a while, and I woke up to all that nonsense many years ago. But nowadays, what's even more concerning about, quote unquote, the system is this specter of technocracy, which is essentially an effort to shift governance away from rule by our fellow human beings, oligarchs, bureaucrats, the ruling party in power at the time, shifted away from that, which is not ideal either, into governance by algorithm, by scientists, by experts, and to create like a massive panopticon surveillance society. This has been communicated in large part by what some refer to as the globalists or the New World Order. But more recently, with the advent of COVID, many people became more familiar with the World Economic Forum and their Great Reset initiative, part of which is the Fourth Industrial Revolution, which really just aims to merge biology and technology. So there's some key technologies that I'm concerned with. Among them are digital IDs. That's actually one of the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. Digital ID, social credit scores, of course, which we have in many ways already through a lot of the internet censorship and people being debanked. I've been debanked myself. I'd love to get more into central bank digital currencies, which is another concerning technology. And then the vaccine passport thing, that was just the vaccine was the original iteration of this vaccine passport technology. Really, it's about controlling people's freedom of movement. So those are just 4 technologies. There's a whole slew of others. And while artificial intelligence has all sorts of promise and hope, it's also being used in some pretty nefarious ways to socially engineer the public. And so that's a big concern that I have. And I think that's a system that's most definitely worth exiting. But we can't just, protest, yell at government buildings, vote the bums out, vote for new bums that are completely controlled and beholden to Israel, like Trump. But I think it's up to us to create the world that we desire. Because voting for the lesser of two evils, or just a slightly more tolerable version of tyranny or technocracy, but it's like our big tech bros, it's our elites on our side, which is hogwash. That's not going to get us to an optimal environment for living and peacefully existing and thriving as human beings. We got to create those systems that are in alignment with our values.
So you mentioned Trump, and I want to play a little bit of a devil's advocate here. Trump's in charge. We don't have Kamala. We don't have the Biden administration. We don't have that group of elites that looks like they were steering the United States off a cliff into the insane asylum. So, Trump's in charge now. The golden era, or the golden age of America, is back. At least this is what's being communicated. Do you not see it that way? What do you see as far as Trump and being part of the establishment? I mean, he is positioning himself as the anti-establishment candidate or the anti-establishment president. But from what I take from your perspective, it's business as usual. Is that right?
It's business as usual, just with a different brand. It's a shift. So, having been paying attention to politics since 2002, I've been through a lot of U.S. presidential elections, and every single time it's the lesser of two evils is the choice that people are given. And every single time a ton of people just acquiesce, at least it's not the other guy. I think it's possible, and I'm a conspiracy researcher guy, but I always draw the line at speculation. I'll make it clear it's speculation. So this is speculation. It may be possible that this entire Biden era was deliberately made terrible so as to really pave the way for people to fall 100% in line with Trump. And there's this pendulum effect. The left and right, it's a facade, it's an illusion, it's a control mechanism. Professor Carol Quigley, who wrote this voluminous history of the global predator class called Tragedy and Hope, he even mentioned specifically this whole left-right paradigm. The idea is to get people to believe that the two parties are against each other, when in all reality they're still advancing that same agenda. And so that's what I believe is taking place here. It's a shift. So there's surface level tyranny. There's corruption and fraud and waste and abuse and too many taxes and controlling free speech and there's these smaller level things that right now everybody's attention is focused on through the DOGE, the Department of Government Efficiency, and everyone's like, this is a victory and we got all these cool people in office. Now again, the whole Israel thing is a huge piece because the Trump administration is so packed with Zionists. And it's nothing against Jewish people or whatever, but it's clear there's an agenda here to manipulate the Middle East and all sorts of crazy stuff going on. That's a problem too, and I think it's more Zionist than the Biden administration was. But beyond that, it's everyone's focused on this traditional tyranny and cutting fraud and waste and bureaucracy, but in all reality, the technocracy, all right, differentiated tyranny and technocracy, the technocracy is advancing nonetheless, and in many cases, it's been accelerated. So while everyone's paying attention to left versus right, Kamala versus Trump, cut the bureaucracy and the waste, and we got our guys in office, the agenda is advancing. And one of the biggest problems with Trump over Kamala is with Kamala, what you see is what you get. with Biden and all that. We know that they're clowns. We know they're corrupt. But the challenge is there was this massive freedom movement. And again, I've seen the evolution of this freedom movement for over 20 years, the different iterations of the Patriot movement and the Ron Paul Liberty Revolution and all sorts of stuff, right? And there was this massive uprising where people just were totally fed up with government, and we see that government's the problem. Not who's in charge of government, but the system itself that aims to control us and do so on a massive scale through this massive geographic monopoly on the initiation of violence. That's what government is. That's what the state is, I should say. And so now a bunch of people that were rebels, now they're like, oh, our guy's in power. Now they're acquiescing, they're resting on their laurels, and meanwhile the technocracy is advancing. You got massive investments from Oracle and OpenAI. We have central bank digital currency agenda, which is continuing, but now it's shifted. And I think this can sum up the key difference between the EU, deep state, Democrat, Kamala Biden faction and the Trump, Israel, technocratic faction as well. Now it's like, well, let's try to roll it out with government, EU, censorship, all that stuff. Let's push forward these policies through government. Oh, that's not as efficient as we hoped. Well, now let's shift gears and let's push forward these policies through business and the merging of big tech, big corporate with government subsidies and cutting bureaucracy. This is what Doge, I believe, is really all about. Cutting and limiting the bureaucracy so as to pave the way and open the door to technocracy, artificial intelligence, things being more efficient. So I think it's a grand illusion. The tyranny's marching on, nonetheless. The free speech issues are marching on, and X ain't the most free speech platform if you're speaking out against Elon or speaking out against Israel, that's for sure. And then all the while, technocracy is advancing and in many instances accelerating, and a bunch of freedom people are now asleep at the wheel, unfortunately.
Yeah, there's a few things that I want to get into here, but I'll start with this. The way I picture things, my mental model for how I see things playing out, just based off current events and just how the resistance movement or the freedom movement in the States has basically now been placated because Trump's in office. Their guy's there. Like you said, everyone can kind of rest on their laurels. When Kamala was in office, the tyranny was much more, much more in your face, right? It was much more noticeable. And now that it's Trump, it gets to maneuver kind of in the shadows of this facade of a freedom, America First movement. So going back to my mental model here, I inevitably see this going two ways. There's going to be a bifurcation in humanity, a split in some sense. I think that there's a large portion of the population that will just default to whatever system is being put in place. And then there will be another portion of humanity that kind of recognizes the game that's being played, that is grounded in their principles. And I see freedom pockets emerging, and this is where this idea of exit and build comes out. Do you see that happening? Do you see that bifurcation happening? And then also, is there, like, a lot of people are black-pilled in terms of like the conspiracy movement, let's just call it, or the awareness that's happening on what's going on. Do you see an opportunity for us to kind of escape this technocratic system that's being built around us?
Yeah, and I appreciate the whole bifurcation thing. My good friend Derek Bros calls it the fracturing, and we saw it take place with COVID. A lot of people just went along to get along, didn't want to buck the system. And a huge piece of the motivation for people when they finally buckled for the shot was the social pressure and conformity. It wasn't even the experts or their desire to protect themselves or whatever. It was like, everybody else is doing it, and I've been holding out, and now I'm feeling like I'm a bad person because everybody's judging me, and that's pretty powerful. Either way, so there were people that saw through it. They knew what was up early on, some later, and we already saw that split starting to form. So yes, I do believe that technocracy in large part will be successfully implemented on a mass scale, especially in the cities, which is why a huge piece of our exit and build strategy encourages people to exit the cities and to build community and buy land out in the country, which is exactly what we did. I was born and raised in Austin, Texas my entire life. And it started to get really weird during COVID. And my ex-wife, she lived 3 hours east in Conroe, which was north of Houston. And I remember during the lockdowns and all sorts of craziness, we'd meet halfway to exchange the kids. And, you know, as you're driving through, you see fewer and fewer masks, more people just living the normal life at the gas stations in the rural town. So I really want to encourage people, if you do want to experience greater freedom now, and I believe the farming, back to the land, shaking hands with the neighbor, you know, taking the family out on a walk on the town square lifestyle is a better life in general than the hustle and bustle busy city. Not for everyone. A lot of young people like the city, but I would encourage people, if you do see the writing on the wall, you can have the city life and you can buy a little 2-acre homestead or buy a piece of land and plop an RV on it out in the country if crap gets really crazy. But I do believe that the cities are going to be the first to go through this smart city agenda. That's the total surveillance, panopticon society. You even have the 15-minute city thing, which is springing up. But there are going to be pockets of freedom. In fact, one of these popular essays, and it was actually from like 2016 or 2018, before the Great Reset Initiative was even announced. It was by a World Economic Forum participant, attendee, and it was in Forbes magazine. And the title was like, "The year is 2030. I own nothing, have no privacy, and I've never been happier," which is like a blatant piece of propaganda. But you read through the article, and it's like the AI robots took over our jobs, and we don't really own anything. We just rent things now, and I don't even have my own living room, and I'm not using my living room. Other people are using the living space. And then at the end, it's like, but I'm really concerned with those that got left behind, that didn't go along when the robots took our jobs. They live in little 19th century villages and self-supplying communities outside of the city. And so even the World Economic Forum has already like game theorized, like what's it going to be like for the people that don't go along? So now, of course, there's always the future outcome where they just come crush us all. But, you know, there's always this check and balance, because everyone's like, well, they'll just come take your land, or they'll send drones out to kill you. I pray it doesn't get that bad, but if it does get that bad at that point, it's like, it's better to live on your feet than to die on your knees. It's like, I don't know, I guess this was our destiny to like go out in some glorious bang fighting against AI predator drone robots or something. Anyway, and the funny thing is, some people may be like, this sounds all kooky and weird. Who is this guy you have on, Michael? But it's like all totally legit, and this type of thing is happening now, and it's like governments using those AI drone explosive devices against one another. But in Gaza, actually, there were those drones. Apparently, I heard reports about these drones were being used against journalists that were exposing the war crimes in Gaza. So to answer your question, long story short, I'm with you. There's going to be a bifurcation. I do believe technocracy is going to be successful for most people. And I worry that there's a lot of people that are awake and aware, but out of convenience or a desire to conform as well, or maybe out of sheer laziness that they're not willing to go get their hands dirty and put a little skin in the game and do something different, they're going to get caught up in the technocracy as well. And the idea is to create an environment. I realized early on in my conspiracy research what this predator class is really after is creating an environment where they cease the cycle of revolutions. Because I explore history as a cycle of revolutions where people are in power and then things get so tyrannical and then they throw the bums out, but now they become the new bums and power corrupts absolutely. And it's just a series of these revolutions. Well, the technology now exists through social credit scores, mass surveillance, CBDC, cutting your ability to provide for yourself. We see it in China, you know. They're even scrubbing the Tiananmen Square incident out from history. So the worry is that when this technology gets put in place, it'll prevent future uprisings and humanity will be forever enslaved. So we really are at a precipice, and each one of us gets to decide which path we take.
Let me ask you then, there's this kind of thesis out there, the sovereign individual thesis, that kind of portrays a world where the individual is going to be much more liberated, much more empowered through technology. Do you see that as a possibility? Is that something that we should actually be working towards, figuring out how to leverage technology in order to create that freedom and independence in our lives? So in your example, for instance, with the drones coming out to the countryside in order to wipe out whatever resistance movements there are or independent communities that exist, I would imagine something like leveraging technologies, having your own defensive drone army where the balance of power is somehow equalized. Do you see that being a possibility? If so, are you looking to leverage technology, for instance, even with like cryptocurrency and stuff like that?
Yeah, for sure. And we went a little extreme with the drone swarms and stuff. I don't know if folks are familiar with Mike Adams of Natural News, but he's here in Texas, and we're buddies. But we did an interview with him once, and he was saying the same thing. Like they're actually experimenting with robotic AI predator squirrels that'll like come and it was just kind of tripped out, and you're just like, whoa, what a weird, scary future. But besides the drones, we are experiencing this now, and yes, I do believe technology is a positive thing, positive force for humanity, but it can also be leveraged for control. It could be used for freedom and privacy and autonomy. It could be used for control and slavery and surveillance. And of course, cryptocurrency is the perfect thing to explore that with. So on the one hand, you have digital money that's surveilled, censorable, centralized. And on the other hand, you have private digital money that is uncontrollable and decentralized. And so the aim, first of all, when it comes to central bank digital currencies, I'm a big fan of Aaron Day's analysis, where he's just like, we basically already have a central bank digital currency. I don't know the exact percentage of money that's ones and zeros and like bank account ledger balances and Federal Reserve balances, but it's a substantial amount, like 90% plus. It's not. There's very little cash, and even the cash is like a general ledger entry, right? And apparently, they're all Oracle databases as well, and so you can already be censored through the money, except with cash, of course. But I've been shut out of PayPal twice, both of my companies. One of my companies, I sell cannabis and kratom products. They're all legal products, right? Like Delta 8 and CBD and stuff, and then kratom. So I've had 2 PayPal accounts shut down. And then when I tried to set one up for my business now, Live Free Academy, I guess they finally realized I'm the same person or something. And like a year later, they shut that one down too. I had Square shut down, Cash App shut down, multiple. When I used to run an underground bookstore, we sold health products and like conspiracy and libertarian books. I had my credit card terminal shut down. And then I got debanked from Frost Bank, a Texas bank, because they discovered that I was selling CBD and kratom, which aren't illegal. And in fact, the Farm Bill had already passed with the first Trump administration legalizing CBD, and Texas had passed a piece of legislation legalizing it as well. So I personally was debanked and deplatformed on multiple occasions, not to mention the surveillance and all the KYC requirements. So it's practically already there, but they want to push it to the next level and make it even more surveilled and make it even easier to control. And going back to the shift with Trump and the Kamala regime and the deep state in them, obviously it's not Kamala who's one of the figureheads, right? She was just a little puppet, but it was like, let's roll it out with government and let's roll it out centralized, top down. Well, that's not the strategy now. Now the strategy is let's roll it out via businesses and stable coins, of course, Tether especially, which is highly censorable, completely centralized. It could be a total Ponzi that's going on, which may be responsible for jacking the price up of Bitcoin historically over the past few years. But so that's one path, and then the other path is Monero. I'm a big Monero guy. I'm a big Bitcoin guy too, and unfortunately the narrative shifted away from peer-to-peer electronic cash towards Bitcoin, and there's still maximalists that are like, you're living in the past, get over it, that was already decided, the consensus spoke, you're just bitter like Roger Ver accolade or whatever nonsense. But it's like, no man, to really speak frankly about it and to like examine objectively, it is unfortunate that Bitcoin was hijacked and co-opted and largely neutralized as a revolutionary tool to bring peer-to-peer censor-proof electronic cash to the world. And I know people will say, well, what about Lightning Network? It's private in many ways and it's peer-to-peer, but very few people are hosting their own Lightning node and using non-custodial platforms. Most of it is shifted into the custodial wallet, which can be censored. Now, is that better than PayPal and whatnot? Sure. But nonetheless, it ain't the vision and the dream and the hope that I got involved into Bitcoin back in 2012, 2013. That's where Monero comes into play, because it is decentralized, it is censor-proof, and it's 120,000% private. Maybe not that private. When the full chain membership proofs come out, it'll be really foolproof. But it's an arms race, and so they're going to use technology to control, surveil, shut people out of the economy, and manipulate people. Huge element of this is social engineering. Like, we need you to take the shot. No, we're not going to take the shot. Most people will just take it. These people aren't going to take the shot. All right, what can we do now? How can we twist their arm and get them to say uncle? Same thing. Well, we want them to take the next shot, or we want them to comply with some sort of personal carbon allowance, which is what the World Economic Forum is also pushing. With some, like, that's what the vaccine passport thing was like. I got a green light. I can go into the store or the restaurant because I took my shot. But in the future, it'll be like, I got a green light. I haven't exceeded my monthly carbon allotment. I haven't traveled as much, so I can go into the next district, or I can hop on the train to go visit my grandparents. They want to be able to socially engineer people by saying, well, you're going to be spending more money on this or that, like a sin tax, it's tied in with the medical records, or you went to the protest, or you were associating with somebody that went to the protest, and now your pass is red, now you can't purchase this or that. That's what the CBDCs are all about. So it's like an arms race, and stuff gets cracked and hacked over here, or revealed over here. And then the cypherpunks and the encryption experts go figure something else out, and then they got this here. Now we got to do this over here. So it's basically the animating contest of freedom, and I'm glad to be a part of it.
So, all right, let's go back to Bitcoin, because I'm curious on your thoughts there. Now, Bitcoin may have not panned out in the way that you hoped it would. Do you still see it as a tool for freedom, a tool for liberation? Is there some aspect of Bitcoin that you still see as a significant force in pushing freedom for the individual forward?
So there's a couple pieces of that, and now it's clear the narrative is Bitcoin is digital gold, a store of value. It's not an optimal medium of exchange. I don't know what the fees are right now. They're probably $1 or less, but sometimes they're $5 and $20, and that's not optimal for a medium of exchange. So then it's like, okay, well then where are we at now? It's not peer-to-peer electronic cash like we had hoped, and the Lightning Network, this layer 2 thing, is convoluted, and there's been some bugs exposed here and there, and I don't know what percentage, but a significant percentage of users are using custodial wallets, which I wouldn't even call them wallets, custodial platforms. So there's that. But when it comes to like, okay, well, what value, how cool is it to have digital gold? So on the one hand, for individuals, it's still pretty cool to have a means of storing value that is deflationary, that is likely to go up in value, that is so it's unconfiscatable, right? And that's the beauty. But I've always differentiated when I've communicated about Bitcoin. And again, being in the game for so long, I used to communicate like this about Bitcoin. Yeah, this was the elevator pitch. Bitcoin's this new technology. It's completely decentralized and censor resistant. Like, you can't be shut down from doing transactions. And you can send money anywhere in the world for little to no fee, like less than even the credit cards, or no fee at all. And that's not always the case now. Like buying a $5 cup of coffee if the transaction fee is $1. That doesn't really work out. So now it's like, well, what is the value proposition? Well, it's a way to protect wealth, to grow wealth. And I would say it's unconfiscatable. But we just saw on Twitter, maybe you saw it, there was like somebody that was in trouble for something, and the government saw some email communication or whatever, or saw that they had a Ledger or Trezor wallet software on their computer, and they're like, what's up with all this Bitcoin? And they discovered that they had like 116 Bitcoin. Well, because the ledger is transparent, they're like, you need to turn over that Bitcoin. I don't know if they were doing a civil asset forfeiture or what. And then the guy was like, screw you guys, and he sent it to a bunch of different addresses. Well, that's all transparent too, And then now the government's like, well, what are you doing? We know that you're the one that did that because you had control over the original address. And a lot of people were pointing out this whole I lost it in a boating accident thing isn't really the way to go, because if the government wants to monitor that address that you lost access to the keys in the boating accident, whenever it moves, they're going to be like, hey, wait a second, we're going to indict you or whatever. So there's a challenge there when it comes to freedom. But practically speaking, a lot of people in my audience, because we do Live Free Academy workshops, so we got Bitcoin Basics for Boomers and Beginners is one of our most popular courses. And we recently added in a lot more Monero. So now we have this Monero mechanics module added in there. But there's a lot of people that are still knee deep in the system. And so if someone has all their money in a 401k, an IRA, mutual fund, or whatever, and they're complying with all the tax laws and everything, then it's far superior to shift that over to custodying your own Bitcoin, right? If you're going to be a good citizen. But I believe, if you accumulated a significant amount of Bitcoin or whatever in the past and you never KYC'd it, then more power to you. But you're going to have to be aware whenever you want to move that, make sure that you're doing your UTXO management well, or maybe hooking up to a decentralized coin join. But the ones that were all simple to use got shut down more recently, the Samurai Wallet and Whirlpool stuff. So I think that it's not as revolutionary as it was before. It is still a great tool to protect and grow wealth. And then one other piece was well, if we get governments to adopt Bitcoin and hold it on their reserves, then we can have governments be more responsible to the taxpayers, because now we can see the money and now they're not inflating the currency out of nowhere to fund foreign wars, for example. That's what we used to think too. But, I was a little naive when I got into Bitcoin. It's Bitcoin's going to end the Fed. But it's they were just wow, the digital currency thing's pretty hot. We better come up with our own central bank digital currency to compete with that. And why don't we leverage and utilize every resource at our disposal, including Central Intelligence Agency and including stacking board of directors with MasterCard people and Larry Summers through Blockstream and stuff, so we can neuter its ability to be as revolutionary as possible. Now, the reality that we're facing now is, in all honesty, if banks start custodying Bitcoin on behalf of their customers, if central banks custody and hold Bitcoin, I have no faith that they're not just going to inflate it and issue more fractionally reserve style, just as they did before, just as the original banks did when they were issuing paper notes and holding gold. I think it's a big fugazi. We can't trust other people. And unfortunately, the Bitcoin story, that it doesn't have the happy ending that us early revolutionaries hoped that it would have had. And the saddest part, and I appreciate you because I know you're knee deep in Bitcoin and you probably roll around with a bunch of hardcore Bitcoin maximalists that self-identify as I'm a toxic Bitcoin maximalist. What the hell is that? Then it becomes their identity. You can't even have a rational conversation with them.
Yeah.
But the sad part is everyone's so obsessed with number go up, and Michael Saylor, who epitomizes the antithesis of what the revolutionary cypherpunk ethos was originally, even poking fun at cypherpunks. Why do they care so much about privacy? Everybody's all mesmerized by number go up. And I guess it's to be expected with human emotion and stuff, but it's just really unfortunate. That's why lately I'm still into Bitcoin. I still advise people about Bitcoin. I still have Bitcoin. Bitcoin's great, but it's not the revolutionary tool we had hoped it would be. And I believe Monero now fulfills that role. So rather than being one of these bitter Twitter complainers, which I still do every once in a while, right? I'm just all right, it is what it is. The market spoke. Bitcoin's great. Governments are into Bitcoin now, and they're using theft to inflate their bags here and there. Or they will, more than likely, the U.S. government will. But that's why we got Monero. It's completely private. It's extremely hard to crack, especially if you use it properly. And when the full chain membership proofs come out, where the digital signatures will be mixed up with every digital signature of every transaction that's ever been made on the Monero blockchain, that's going to be really, really foolproof. And that's something that I'm more excited about now than Bitcoin.
Yeah, so I share your concern with Bitcoin. Also, I've had to readjust my perspective on it being some type of revolutionary digital money that is going to reshape society in a way that empowers the individual and liberates free markets. I still have a lot of hope for it, however, but yeah, the issue with fungibility and privacy is a big one. Like you mentioned, it can be easily tracked, traced, and monitored. And if you're doing something that the government doesn't like, I think if they want to target you, it's relatively easy to go after you through the transparency of that blockchain. If we had more privacy initiatives that let's just say, obfuscated transactions, I think it would be much more powerful. I've shifted my view to that of these digital currencies being a tool, and you use these tools based on what the need is or what the necessity is. Like you mentioned, hey, if you want to preserve and store value, right, there is Bitcoin. It seems like it is the Schelling point for capital at this point around the world. And so that you know that, hey, okay, as long as the cryptography holds up, I can store my private keys, and as long as I secure it properly, that I will have this capital available to me. And how I disperse that, I might have to be careful. I might have to use secondhand privacy tools and so forth. But at least I know that this money is saleable, that I can later go ahead and tap into that capital if I need it, and therefore I will use it for that purpose, right? But then if I want to make transactions that I don't want anyone to know about, that I want to maintain my privacy, you have Monero and you have like other privacy coins out there. It seems like Monero's now becoming the de facto privacy tool. I think even Michael Saylor said that if you need privacy, use Monero, right? And so I just look at things now as tools, and depending on what you need them for, you use a tool that is appropriate for that use. Is that kind of how you're seeing things now as well? Is that your perspective?
Yeah, for sure, all day. And the whole, it's just I guess Twitter and the crypto space has gotten so vitriolic. But I like your perspective. It's like, yeah, man, they each have different purposes, and there was this history, and I believe there was some co-opting, but it is what it is. This is the price of liberty's eternal vigilance. We're going up against some pretty powerful players here. We should expect, I always say, like, Bitcoin being released and taking root, in the Silk Road, and a bunch of cypherpunks starting to use it. That was like the end of Star Wars and New Hope. And it's like we took a shot to the Death Star, and we got it. But then the next episode, of course, the Empire Strikes Back. And they're like, no, you got this tool. We've been looking at it through the CIA, and we're going to go ahead and roll out our little operation to make sure that it doesn't become peer-to-peer electronic cash for the world. That's the other thing about the Lightning Network, too. And like a lot of Bitcoin maxis, that it's a moving goalpost. People that I respect, too. And it's like, it was like, remember, originally it was peer-to-peer electronic cash for the world. And love or hate Roger Ver, he would always throw that piece in. Like, we were trying to create a competing currency to compete with the United States dollar and other fiat currencies that are responsible for mass atrocities. And then that kind of got taken away. And now it's like, well, Lightning Network. But it's like, yeah, even if you wanted to expand the Lightning Network to have global adoption, you would still need to massively increase the block size to be able to onboard a ton of people. And it's not that we're going to onboard everybody overnight, but the momentum was there with adoption, and like Dell.com and Overstock.com and Newegg and all these major companies. And I was out there pounding the pavement, getting restaurants and coffee shops set up and doing local activism. And that's not the case now, unfortunately. And again, it's the non-custodial versus custodial is something I'll differentiate.
I will push back on that, just in the sense that I think it's hard to change consensus rules, right? Especially on a distributed network like Bitcoin. And so I think that was always an uphill battle. And it may be the case that Bitcoin was never meant to fulfill that narrative. That's kind of the view that I've adopted now, is that maybe this wasn't always, although we projected our ideals onto it. Oh, wow, we got, Liberty money now, and we can transact peer-to-peer all around the world, and this is going to free up humanity in ways that we've never seen. Maybe that wasn't the narrative just from the get-go, and like this evolutionary path that Bitcoin has taken, you just have to accept and do what you can with what you got. And so that's kind of my perspective on the block size war and all of that stuff. It was just a really tough battle for Roger Ver to win, and I would say that the tactics that he
It wasn't
used,
just Roger Ver.
Yeah, there was.
It was like Roger Ver and Bitmain and Coinbase and a ton of major industry players that were there at the table trying to come up with some kind of compromise, like segregated witness 2x. There was definitely chicanery. I'm with you, though. Like, you're a spiritual guy, it's like, are we going to be all worked up? And maybe I seem worked up on the podcast, on this interview, but I'm not losing sleep over it. It's just like acceptance. It didn't go that way. It is what it is. However, there is a lot to be learned so as to not allow what I believe was a coordinated co-option or a hijacking, as the book title says. We should be aware of the tactics that will be utilized in order to prevent something that is truly revolutionary from taking foot. So it's like a case study now on consensus and maybe I do think there was some chicanery though, and some manipulation and some backdoor dealing, unfortunately. And I do believe that the book Hijacking Bitcoin lays out the case that the consensus was actually on the side of increasing the blocks, not the other way around. But there was some, influence, and there's a lot of censorship. But either way, you're right. It's like, well, here we are now. We don't have a time machine, so what are we going to do? We got Bitcoin, which is digital gold, and arguably, I don't know how this would go, but maybe if it did take foot as a medium of exchange globally, not, who knows if it would be competing with PayPal and such. But there was a time, even before Venmo and Cash App and all them really took foot, that it could have been Bitcoin apps that all the young people were using instead of Venmo and PayPal and Cash App and stuff. Maybe it would be worth more. Or maybe because it was more revolutionary and a threat to the government, it would be worth substantially less because there wasn't that tolerance being a digital gold compared to a medium of exchange. But either way,
I will say this from my perspective, just being in the Bitcoin community, I do think that the narrative of it being digital cash is still alive. That hope is still there. There's still people working on it, whether it's on Lightning Network or different initiatives. I just read this piece by Parker Lewis where he was basically examining the digital gold argument that Saylor puts forward, and examining whether Bitcoin is digital gold or if it's currency. And from his perspective, he sees it as both. And this is kind of the perspective that I have as well. And eventually down the line, what you're going to find is that, okay, if I have this pristine capital here and if I have digital gold, why does it make sense for me to then go back into any other currency system, whether it be fiat or anything else? Because there is an energy cost there in terms of dilution to your purchasing power when you have to pay whatever conversion fee that there exists. I don't know if I'm articulating that clearly, but the point is that eventually what you're going to find is that people will just find it more convenient to just transact in Bitcoin, therefore bypassing whatever other currency systems that exist. And my hope, and this is kind of what I have to now accept, is that the tools will be built in order to make Bitcoin transactional, whether that's layer 2, whether that's some type of federated system. And there's just going to be compromises that have to be made, let's just say on security or something like that, but you will still be able to transact in Bitcoin as time goes on. But that's still yet to be seen. I do also have this idea that I don't think Bitcoin is out of the clear yet in terms of a hostile takeover. I think that if it poses a threat to the global establishment and their power, let's just say call them the New World Order, right? That there will be some type of pushback against that, whether it's some type of conglomerate trying to centralize the network to a point where they have enough control that they can either censor transactions, that they can surveil the blockchain, or whether they can, I don't know what else there would be, but I do think that there exists that threat still out there that I think a lot of Bitcoiners haven't yet really explored to the extent that it needs to be explored in order to mitigate the risks. Mm-hmm. And so I still see this very much as an experiment. We're 15, 16 years in. And so there's a lot of things that can occur in the future. And that's why it's more important for me to just kind of focus on the principles, focus on those foundational aspects of life that are going to help us thrive, and not, bet the farm, so to say, on Bitcoin succeeding to all of our wildest expectations. Does that make sense?
No, it's a very mature way to look at it, for sure. There's more important things than Bitcoin in life, like family and friends and farming. Bet the farm, right? Having a piece of land or having access to food production systems in many ways is far more valuable than a digital currency. And I don't want to poo-poo on those folks that are building the what do you call it? The parallel economy using Bitcoin Lightning Network. Somebody I'm trying, the purest thing sometimes gets in the way. And so even if a substantial amount of the platforms are custodial, maybe they're not in some areas. That's still pretty freaking awesome, right? So I definitely want to applaud folks in like Bitcoin Beach, or my friend Derek Bros was just down in Costa Rica, and there's a little small town there's an intentional community with a bunch of Bitcoin folks, and they got a lot of the local vendors and stuff to use Bitcoin and Lightning Network. So I definitely don't want to denigrate that. I mean, any effort on those fronts should be applauded. And again, we have Monero and all that stuff. But I'm with you. Like, we can't put all our eggs in one basket. The empire is very cunning, and there is a path to even further denigrate Bitcoin's revolutionary capabilities. BlackRock, of course, is deeply involved, and they got their fingers in a lot of the mining conglomerates now as well. So there's more to life than just Bitcoin. And I think ultimately, like, if we're looking at tyranny and technocracy and what's the best tool, we've been talking about different tools, I think community. Having a tight-knit community of people that share your values, it doesn't even have to be 100% share your values, but share the most important ones: mutual respect, bodily autonomy, conscious communication, people that are self-reflective, doing self-development, eating well, taking care of themselves. You got a bunch of people and you provide value to them, there's a reciprocity that takes place, and ultimately the relationships that we have with other people, I believe, is our greatest asset. Not only as a defense and resistance to this crazy predator class nonsense we're having to deal with, but also just organically, like, this is how we ought to live with our brothers and sisters in a tribal kind of environment where we support one another and hang out with each other. And when there's a new baby in the community, we all show up and rally around that family,
Now, typically that I've seen that happen in Christian communities. And I think it's because they're all centralized around, an ideology, a certain set of principles and beliefs. And what I've noticed, though, in the freedom movement is that it's kind of fractured in that regard, right? It's naturally, I think it's just hard to get independent thinkers to naturally coordinate into some type of collective action if there isn't like a shared belief structure beyond just freedom. Now, you're actively trying to build out intentional parallel communities and economies. Have you noticed that dynamic? What's your experience with that?
Yeah, for sure. For one thing, like, I started off as a conspiracy, this whole identity thing, right? We should avoid it in general. Just a person that cares about the world and wants to leave a good, positive impact on the world. Father, husband, entrepreneur, activist, whatever. Monero, maximalist. No, I'm not even a maximalist. Forget all the maximalism. Anyway, so early on, I was a libertarian for a while, and like would go to the libertarian conferences and the Free State Project and all this stuff. Much respect for the Free State Project, but a lot of libertarians were very too individualist centered. And there's Ayn Rand, the virtue of selfishness. There's something to be said about that, but it wasn't like, I'm going to show up for you and I'm willing to maybe sacrifice some of my well-being because I care about other people's humanity, right? And interesting, so that's like, I'm a libertarian and I roll with a lot of libertarians, but again, the label and then that specific people that are like so intellectual libertarians, it's hard to build community and have that reciprocity with, a tighter bond that extends beyond our individual self. And, one thing that I really noticed that was a big takeaway for me, I visited Cheran in Michoacan, and this is a community of around 20,000 people in one of the most violent states in Mexico. And this community, it must have been 20 years ago or so, they had a levantamiento, an uprising against the local gangs and against the local government, their municipal government and municipal police. They rose up because they were like raping the sacred forest, and they were planting avocado. The avocado trade is a huge thing for cartels and stuff. And this is like a sacred forest, and we actually had the honor of the town elders went and took us on a tour of the sacred forest, and we saw this water spring that fed water to the community for literally hundreds, if not thousands of years. And so they rose up, they threw the bums out, and really the straw that broke the camel's back was they would kidnap the young men in the community. And it wasn't just the kidnapping, but then they would like make fun of them and like poke at them, these bully gang members. And finally the women, the older women especially, these mexicanitas, they're like, we ain't gonna take that anymore. You've crossed the line, beyond crossed the line. So they like roadblocked one of the streets as they were taking stuff out of the avocados. They blocked the streets, and all the community came. There were some gunshots. I think like 1 or 2 people died, but it wasn't like a violent like battle because they were overwhelmed by people power. And they like took out these malos, they call them, and they beat them up and all sorts of stuff. Anyway, they ended up instituting their own indigenous form of governance that went way back to the indigenous bloodlines of the Purépecha, which is a indigenous culture in the Michoacan region. And the interesting thing is that the Purépecha were also united in fighting against not only the Spanish Empire, but they put up quite a resistance to the Aztec Empire too. So after visiting this community, we stayed there for several days. I interviewed them. They took us around. We broke bread. It was such an incredible experience. I was like, why is it that they rose up and like had this united front and threw these bums out, literally? But here we are in the States, and we're all fractured. And I came to realize it was this common culture that went back generations and generations, fighting the Spanish together, the same family bloodlines, and they like largely stay in the same area. And I was like, well, if we don't have the same blood, which is so powerful, what can we unite behind? Well, maybe principles and maybe values we can unite behind. But then still, like, this whole Western ethos, it goes back to this selfish, individualistic look. So it's still something I'm trying to wrap my head around. I know having a strong spiritual foundation definitely makes a difference, whether it's Christ or whatever. I've definitely been deepening my relationship with Jesus Christ, and when it comes to activism and motivation and momentum and how I show up in the world, it's definitely bore tons of fruit. So if people are lost or struggling or not able to reach their peak performance or whatever it may be, keep running into resistance, you may call on Jesus Christ for some support, and I'm sure he'll show up for you. But I think it's definitely an issue, and I've found that the more Western the mind and the spirit, the more individualistic. But we don't want to go all the way to the other side of being like communist and giving up our individual rights. So it's like individual rights, but yeah, man, community is really important, and we can't do it alone. And we should be willing to show up for those that are part of our tribe, even if it's at our expense, or if it's not just selfishly for profit seeking or whatever. Just try to desire, like the Buddha taught, to give and support without any expectation of anything in return. Because at the end of the day, if you show up like that in the world, you are going to get that much more back in return without even asking for it. So it's a key piece. We're big on intentional community all day. We have at our property, it's my wife and I, my 2 kiddos, and then Ryan, who works with us here at Live Free Academy, the VP of Sales, his wife, and then there's a family, husband and wife. They got 3 kids. Their youngest was actually birthed in our guest house, and the mom did a total free birth. No midwife, no nothing, which I thought was pretty bold and pretty brave. So she's a super strong woman. And then we just have another guy that moved in. So we got a little tribe there, and we're connected with a ton of people in Central Texas. So we're trying to make it happen.
Yeah, I think, I've been thinking about this as well, thinking about building parallel community or, kind of like your tribe, for instance, right? And what it takes, what's the social glue, what's the dynamics that will hold people together. And yeah, there definitely does seem to be something to the Western mind that atomizes people, and the collective action that's necessary in order to have a community thrive seems to be missing, especially when the option to default to whatever established system exists, and they can always exit, right? And so, I don't know how much I want to go into it here, but there are definitely some elements there that need exploring as far as what the cohesive glue is that keeps a society together. But I do want to ask you about personal development, and you mentioned Jesus Christ and faith and working towards being a better person and developing the skill sets necessary. Like, how important is that if you're going to adopt this exit and build strategy, right? How important is that to level yourself up mentally, spiritually, even physically?
It's everything. For any, I mean, especially if we're doing exit and build and we're like putting ourselves out there and taking risks in some way to exit this beast system, I believe that a lot of people have a tendency to focus on these external enemies and the banks and what Trump or Kamala or whatever, the New World Order. But in all reality, like, we are the biggest source of setback in our own lives. Doubt, insecurity, limiting beliefs, especially. And it's easy to like be a victim and to blame the outside world, because then we can abrogate responsibility. But something I learned from Grant Cardone, I was much more of a fan of Grant Cardone. Now he's kind of not as much of a fan of Grant Cardone nowadays. I learned a lot from him, and he got me to. His
10X book was fantastic.
It's a great book. It's a great book, and he helped us apply the tactics and strategies to grow, a pretty successful business. But either way, he taught, successful people take responsibility for everything. So even if you got conflict, drama, or other people do something, you're like, how did I attract this person? Or what is it about, my standards that I'm even allowing this person around in my life? You take responsibility for everything. And so when people have goals, first of all, a lot of people don't even have goals at all. And when you don't have goals or a clear vision of what you want for your life, how can you ever expect to attain it? Not only that, but when you're not playing out your own program that you create for yourself, you're necessarily playing a role in someone else's program, whether it's a boss or the government or the predator class or whatever. So people need to get real conscious about the life design that they desire, set goals, set ambitious goals. There's no reason why we shouldn't be living the dream life, or at least working towards it. And inevitably, when you have these goals or a business or you're moving to a new country or whatever, you're going to brush up against these limiting beliefs. And the limiting beliefs are in large part just our own inner voice that we picked up a lot of times from our parents, from bullies in high school, from the media, from the modern culture, and we internalize it. And so that little soundtrack that's in our head, oftentimes people show up as their own worst enemy, when all they got to do is be mindful of that soundtrack, flip the script, and become their number one cheerleader. And it makes a world of difference. So I'm a big fan of mindfulness, because a lot of times, like, I realized I was reading Nonviolent Communication. I had a marriage that fell apart. I got 2 kids from previous marriage. We were together for like 9 years, and it ended in like a very terrible divorce. And then like there were multiple lawsuits afterwards, even though we didn't have a bunch of assets and stuff. It was just a total drama fest. My kids were exposed to the dramas. Terrible. But like Napoleon Hill says, within every adversity lies the seed of an equal or greater benefit. And so rather than wallow and allow the pressure and the weight of my family falling apart to crush me and then like become an alcoholic or what, just avoid all the pain or blame other people, blame my ex-wife, I was like, what role did I play in this? And how can I make sure I don't repeat this again? Because I don't want my kids to go through that ever again. I don't want to go through that. How can I learn? How can I grow as a man? And that's when I just really leaned heavy into self-development. I started heavy before we divorced, actually, thinking that it would save the day, but it was fruitless. I guess it was too late by then. It was like Tony Robbins and then the Buddhism stuff, the mindfulness. And so I would read the nonviolent communication stuff, and it's like show up, express your emotions and how you feel, and make an observation, and then make a request so your needs can be met. And I'd be reading it, like, this is great. Yeah, I got this. This is going to change everything. But then in the moment, you're like, God dang it, the kids do something crazy or someone says something that triggers you and all that goes out the window. That's why I realized like mindfulness is everything, because if you're more mindful in the present moment, aware of those thoughts as they're springing up, you're able to interrupt the pattern and you're able to tap into that space between stimulus and response that Stephen Covey talks about. So the number one habit of highly effective people, the first out of 7, is to be proactive, and you tap into that space through mindfulness, and it makes a world of difference. But as of late, I realized that I kept on running up against resistance with our ambitions. Like we have a desire to acquire a large piece of property and do a massive eco-community development. And as we would get closer and closer, I found myself like lashing out against my wife and like getting all overwhelmed, right? And then I still have struggles, with anger, how I show up with the wife and the kids. And I came to realize like all the self-development, and I could read as many books about Napoleon Hill and Tony Robbins and this and that, and do it in a, what's the word? Just do it more intellectually, but I wasn't able to get to where I wanted to be until I realized that there's a spiritual component as well. And so like we have all these ambitious goals, and I got some issues we're dealing with. I still couldn't come through on them. So that's when I was like, well, maybe there's something to this Jesus Christ thing. And my mom too was going through cancer, and she's not out of the woods, but she's much better and like stable and everything. But she still is dealing with it and medication and stuff. But it's not an emergency. But I saw her show up like just such a rock with her faith. Like not even, obviously she was scared and stuff, but she was like so stoic and just like, I know if the Lord, he's got a plan for me. If I go now, I'm okay with that. If I live longer, I'm going to make the most out of every day. And just to see how she was so centered, I was like, I want some of that, So lately I've been diving deeper with old JC, and it's really just been bearing all sorts of fruit and praying for other people. And then it really does create a pretty solid moral code to live by and to abide by. And there's a whole lot of really good stuff in there. So the funny thing though is a lot of people are like, they have this visceral response to Jesus. And you got to think like, man, the churches have really done a number on this powerful message and spiritual community, to where when you talk about forgiveness or you share some scripture that's like super benign and chill, and like love one another and love your neighbor like you love yourself and love God, people are like, oh, and you're like, man, they really threw that off, because there's a lot of to be gained there.
Yeah, wow. I will just say I have a very similar story, similar elements. My mother was going through cancer. I got a divorce from my wife, went through a divorce. And this trailer is where I spent 8 months just reinventing myself and strengthening my faith. And I agree with you where, developing that faith, developing the spiritual lens is very much a big part of personal development. And it can carry you through some very difficult times, as we are ultimately going to face in this world. And so, yeah, I just wanted to corroborate your story there. It's a great one. So let's get on to your Live Free Academy, and let's talk about, what that's about, and, what projects you're working on.
Sure. So back in 2021, April of 2021, I launched my first course with Live Free Academy, because I've been into crypto for so long, and of course it always would coincide with the price going up. So the price goes up, a new all-time high, and everyone's like, teach me crypto, John. You've been talking about it since 2012, 2013. And I always joke around like, I've been telling people to get to the left of the decimal point, meaning to get a whole Bitcoin, since Bitcoin was less than $1,000, when it was like $280, $300. Get yourself a whole Bitcoin while you still can. And then it was 10,000, and I'm like, get yourself a whole Bitcoin while you still can. Now that it's, I guess it's 80K now. It took quite the dip. Even when it was above 100K, it's like, it's going to be harder to do, but you can dollar cost average and try to get yourself a whole Bitcoin. Anyway, so people would be like, teach me. So I would do these consultations and stuff. And for the longest time, I was like, I should do a freaking course. I could just drop so much knowledge on a crypto course. So in 2021, another little bull run, I finally put together a course. and it was like, it was explosive success. Had hundreds and hundreds of people buy a ticket, and I was like, there's something to this. So that's when I started this company. We do online courses, we do coaching, we do in-person events. In fact, we have our Exit and Build Land Summit number 5 coming up, which is all about exiting the city, buying land, building community in the country, regenerative agriculture, intentional community. This year we're doing it at Joel Salatin's Polyface Farms. We still have tickets available for that. exitandbuildlandsummit.com, exitandbuildlandsummit.com. We do it every year. So that's great. And then there's 2 areas we focus on: counter economy, which is a term, the Agorist term, where you like build the counter establishment economy. Same thing as a parallel economy. It runs outside and counter to the mainstream economy. And then the other piece is land and community, homesteading, buying land, growing food, right? And these are the 2 areas I believe are the most important when it comes to navigating this crazy beast system that's being erected all around us. And we're actually doing a new event. It's called the CBDC Opt-Out Challenge. So it'll be a 3-day event where I'll go through all the tactics and the strategies that I've leveraged, that I've taught people, so we can be prepared for this CBDC system. And I think I'm going to have to do some work too to help people realize like it's still rolling forward, especially in the European Union. They're trying to have it done by like October 2025. I saw recently the European Central Bank lady. But Trump is still pushing it forward. Maybe it's not even Trump directly. Those around Trump, this Howard Lutnick guy is the custodian for all these securities on behalf of Tether. Tether's probably going to be the main prize. Programmable, centralized, censorable, all the same qualities of CBDCs. Either way, I got a lot of great strategies. I call them my 4 C's for opting out of CBDCs. First is confidence. It used to be 3 C's, but I added the confidence one because I know so many people are like, it's inevitable, or I'll never be able to learn. Not us young people or whatever that have been in the space for a while, but like a lot of people are like, I see the value in learning about crypto, but I'm just so terrible with my smartphone even, and I still get overwhelmed with Zoom, and they lack the confidence. So there's a mindset piece. Like you got to cultivate that confidence and courage to push forward on this stuff. And then next C is currency, alternative currencies. Not just crypto, but like precious metals, barter. Crypto's not the panacea, like we've been talking about, right? And then commerce or counter economy. So we gotta have alternative income streams, especially if you're on retirement accounts or whatever. We gotta have outside the system income that is censor resistant. We're trading amongst our buddies. We're buying and selling from other people with crypto or with silver. And then the final piece is community. We got to build these tight-knit communities where we can trade amongst ourselves, where we can opt out, where we can support one another if it does get more onerous and treacherous. Anyway, I'll be teaching all the strategies, and one thing that I teach also is called the inside-outside game. So a lot of people are well-established. They have 401ks, they have a mortgage, and I'm like, we're not advocating for people to just let go of all of that or put it all at risk. But we do definitely need to build these outside of the system strategies. So if the pressure does come down and the CBDC system's fully implemented, and it's like you're not going to be able to have access to your retirement account, it's now central bank digital currencies. And in order for your wallet to remain active, you're going to have to be up to date on your inoculations, and you got to make sure that the carbon output hasn't exceeded this certain threshold for this particular quarter. Or we're going to shut you out of the economy. So the idea is like you can keep the inside the system stuff, but make sure you have an exit plan in case this world gets too oppressive. So anyway, I'd love to invite your audience out to that. They could check it out at cbdcoptout.com, cbdcoptout.com. It'll be a live 3-day instructional, practical how to prepare ourselves and how to begin trading amongst ourselves outside the system, no matter what those bozos do. It's always good to do business with other freedom lovers.
Yeah, that sounds really interesting. Sounds like much needed as well. I think that a lot of people are going to need guidance as a lot of these policies, which I've been aware of, I'm sure you've been aware of for a long time, start being implemented. Maybe not in the way that I envisioned, right? Maybe in a roundabout way, but I do still see the push for this technocratic kind of Orwellian system being being pushed forward. And so, yeah, I think that those people who are awake and aware, you know, one thing that I do believe is that you can empower yourself to opt out. You can empower yourself to I like the in and out kind of system that you described there, because I feel like that many times as well, where I have to go inside the matrix, outside the matrix, in order to continue to live my life. But, getting with other people that think along the same mindset, and then also doing it in a proactive way, where it's not just about blackpilling each other. It's also about being proactive on how we can achieve freedom, how we can achieve a fulfilling and purposeful, meaningful life outside the system. I think is remarkable. So, curious to see how it goes, and I'll be looking forward to hearing from you about that. Before we go, one more question: do you have any books you recommend for people to check out? Any books of wisdom that you would say, hey, you need to read this?
Yeah, I got one. Napoleon Hill wrote a book that's not very popular. It's called Outwitting the Devil. And the whole book is a dialogue between Napoleon Hill and the devil. And the devil's trying to get him, throw him off his groove and help him to avoid fulfilling or pursuing his definite purpose. And he shares that, like, if you don't have a definite purpose, you'll find yourself caught in a hypnotic rhythm of life where you're not going according to your own clearly defined purpose. You're like playing in a state of fear, and you're lacking the independent thinking because you've chosen fear instead of faith. The whole thing is fear versus faith. Great book, and it's really cool style how he writes it. But the key takeaway is to identify your definite purpose and just to pursue it with mass desire. So it's a really cool take on Napoleon Hill's work as told through a conversation with Napoleon Hill and the devil tempting him to, and he like forces the devil into an interview to ask him all these questions about how the devil tricks people away from success and greatness and puts them in a state of fear over faith. So Outwitting the Devil by Napoleon Hill is what I would recommend. And thanks for asking.
Awesome. Well, John, thank you so much for coming on and talking to us. It was a fantastic conversation, man. Learned a lot. And hope you do well, and I'll talk to you again sometime.
Yeah, thanks for having me, and keep dropping those nuggets of wisdom on Twitter. Good stuff.
We'll do. Take care.